Hello again, returning to the kind of cyberpunk type city I'm building, with a second building. I also have a lovely cold at the moment, so apologies for the weird nasally voice. To begin with, grabbed some foam core and some hot glue and made a rough template of the building, with a detachable first floor and the ground floor as well. Once I was happy with the overall shape, I went in with some of this under 4 insulation board, which has a nice line texture to it, trimmed it down to size, and then glued it all around, where you would get these concrete sections cladding the outside of the building. I also carved some 45-degree lines to accent the panels. Where I had the foam core below visible, I wanted to give it a plaster effect, so I trimmed out some small sections and carved some brickwork in underneath where the plaster is peeling away. Taking some lengths of garden wire, I then trimmed them down and started making a few various details out of them. So for some external piping, I took some round nose pliers and bent them into about 90-degree turns. Then once happy with the size and the shape, I used some matte Mod Podge to glue them on. For some thicker, straight pipes, I used bamboo skewers trimmed down and then glued into the corners. To cover up some of the seams and blend things together, I trimmed down some EVA foam and used that to cover up the edges of the foam core, as well as patch over a few bits, using matte Mod Podge to secure it in place. For some of the plain sections of walls, I took some more EVA foam, trimmed it into squares, and then trimmed the corners off, so you'd get that 45-degree angle again. Then using more matte Mod Podge to secure that on. To create some pylons running up the outside of the building, I took various pieces of wire and some plastic 8-shaped girders and glued them together into little frames. Then taking some half beads, I glued them along the lengths of the wires, roughly spaced out the same distance. To blend the seams together, I took some general use polyfiller, gave it a quick stir, then applied it over the cracks, using the side of a tool to smooth it down and blend it in. At this stage, I wanted to get an overall feel for how the piece was going, so I primed the entire thing in black gesso. This is a really useful step if you don't know what to do next on a piece. Just by giving it all a unifying colour, you can see what works well together and where needs a bit more attention. For the concrete sections, I went in with a light grey, followed with a beige colour over the top. This is one that looked way brighter being applied than it dried down to, but if it's still too bright, you can apply a dark wash over the top. To get some texture on the plaster sections, I took some white paint and stippled it on using an old makeup brush. Then using watered down black paint, I gave the entire thing a light wash. Now that everything was grimy and dark, I felt it needed a bit more colour, so taking a seafoam green, I then went in and hit the parts made of the EVA foam, which gives it a nice little contrast in colour, and stops the entire thing looking a bit too grey and brown. Next up, I added some graffiti, and my preferred way of doing this now is to take a coloured pen and shade in a big section so it's just nice and blobby, then going in with a black finer tipped pen afterwards, and giving the impression of some lettering or some styles. To dirty down the EVA foam sections, I took some watered down brown paint and gave it a fairly heavy wash, making sure it had different consistency through the panels, so you get a kind of streaky grime effect. And where that was too heavy, I dabbed a bit of the excess off. Using the same mixture, I then went in around the corners and on the edges between the concrete and the plaster panels, so you get a bit of grime building up in the recesses. Because this is not a nice part of town, I took some more of the H-shaped plastic girders and made some bars to cover the windows, using matte Mod Podge to secure them. Then taking the larger frames and some more matte Mod Podge, I secured those to the outside of the piece, over the plain walls where it needed a bit more interest, and on top of the front of the building where I wanted to put a neon sign later. Then with a bit more of the EVA foam, pre-painted with a seafoam green, I blended the corners together so it would cover up any of the unsightly gaps. For some neon signs, I took some more of the gardening wire and the round nose pliers and started bending it into shapes. I didn't have a particular goal while doing this, just something that would look a bit interesting. I don't like specifically putting lettering on the signs because that ties the building to one particular use, whereas using symbols, it's a bit more ambiguous. And someone suggested I try using nail polish to get some real neon effects. And yeah, as far as like a nice globby neon sign goes, I'd say it's a pretty good idea. To add to the light effect, I dry brushed some neon blue behind the lettering, well, symbol, and then glued it on top of the frame. I also noticed a few areas of the nail polish were starting to sag a little bit, and this had been about 24 hours since I let it harden using a UV curer. So hopefully it holds up, but if not, I'll just go in and give it another coat. For the frame on top of the roof, I wanted a few kind of what may have once been solar panels and had fallen into disrepair, so taking some metallic textured cardstock, I trimmed it down into rectangles, and then gave it a light dark wash using some watered down black paint. And once I was happy with the colour, I glued that on top of the roof as well. Moving on to the final details, I attached the kind of pylon wire thing to the side of the building, after giving it a coat of bronze paint. I also made two doors, out of the EVA foam, wrapped around a piece of foam core, so it would just be a friction fit and slot into the two doorways if needed. With those doorways fitted, that is building number 2 done. So significantly less neon signs on this one, but it styles a bit. And it has that whole kind of dingy, horrible 2000 AD meets Cyberpunk type vibe to it. And it fits quite nicely next to the other building. And this will be a nice horrible location for some gangs to fight out over. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope to catch you next time.